U.S. Appeals Court strikes down New Jersey's assault weapons ban on AR-15s. Courthouse News, the Second Amendment Foundation, Reuters, and Politico all put the dispute in the Third Circuit and describe a ruling that changes how New Jersey can enforce its rifle restrictions. The practical issue is not a campaign argument. It is whether state officials seek rehearing, ask the Supreme Court to review the decision, or rewrite enforcement guidance while gun rights groups press similar cases. For the public, the consequence is immediate uncertainty around a major state firearms law and a wider circuit split that can invite national review. Watch next. A docket entry, state attorney general statement, stay request, or Supreme Court petition showing whether the ruling takes effect quickly or remains paused during appeals. Until one of those records appears, treat the current position as a court decision with major legal force but not the final word on national assault weapons rules. A later order will also show whether magazine limits travel with the rifle ruling or move on a separate track. The next public filing, not political reaction, is the record that changes the story, so the record shows who has authority, what changes now, and what remains unresolved, while the careful reading stays limited to the confirmed source trail and pending decision. What to know about the Trump administration's claim that 250,000 non-citizens are registered to vote in 4 states. Reuters, CBS News, The Hill, and PBS frame the issue as a clash between federal election claims, state voter roll records, and demands for evidence. The central question is whether the administration can document the number with auditable state-by-state data, citizenship checks, and named election office records rather than broad allegations. The stakes are practical. Voter list maintenance, state authority, and public confidence can all be affected if federal figures are wrong, incomplete, or unsupported. Watch next. State election office responses, any lawsuit or subpoena, and whether DHS releases records that can be matched against actual registration files. If officials publish methods, dates, and affected states, viewers can judge whether this is an enforceable finding or a political claim. If they do not, the safer reading is that the sourced reporting has identified a disputed assertion awaiting proof. The next concrete record should name the responsible office, the dataset, and the correction process before anyone treats the number as settled, while the careful reading stays limited to the confirmed source trail and pending decision before the public treats the claim as settled for the people, institutions, and markets affected with official paperwork, naming dates, offices, and practical effects for affected viewers. Maine Democrats running to replace Platner as Senate nominee scramble to woo his voters. Reuters, AP News, The New York Times, and The Washington Post describe a Senate primary reset after Graham Platner's exit, with candidates trying to inherit his supporters while sharpening attacks on Susan Collins. The substance is a nomination fight, not just campaign color. Democrats have to decide whether the replacement nominee keeps Platner's outsider appeal, moves toward party leadership, or loses voters who backed him. The stakes are national because Maine is one of the Senate races that can affect control of the chamber. Watch next. Debate footage, county-level endorsements, fundraising reports, polling, and the state party timetable for selecting or confirming the nominee. A strong next filing would show which campaign is actually consolidating volunteers and money, not just claiming momentum. Voters should also watch whether Collins becomes the shared target or whether Democrats keep fighting over ideology. The next measurable record is the campaign finance report or official party calendar, because it separates visible enthusiasm from organized capacity before the public treats the claim as settled for the people, institutions, and markets affected with official paperwork, naming dates, offices, and practical effects for affected viewers, so the record shows who has authority, what changes now, and what remains unresolved. Taylor Farms to launch recall after iceberg lettuce is tied to outbreak. Reuters, The Washington Post, Bloomberg, and NBC News connect Taylor Farms and Cisco lettuce products to a parasite outbreak investigation involving iceberg lettuce from central Mexico. The viewer takeaway is specific. Restaurants, distributors, grocers, and consumers need product names, lot codes, regions, and public health instructions before deciding what to discard or avoid. The stakes are immediate because foodborne illness investigations can widen when distributors identify more customers or when health agencies find additional cases. Watch next. The company recall notice, CDC or FDA outbreak update, distribution list, and any restaurant or supplier statement naming affected products. If those records identify dates and states, the public can act directly. If they remain broad, the risk assessment stays incomplete. The next useful update should also say whether the outbreak source is confirmed, whether more lettuce lots are implicated, and whether any severe illnesses have been reported. This story changes when health officials publish traceable product guidance, not when another summary repeats the recall headline for the people, institutions, and markets affected with official paperwork naming dates, offices, and practical effects for affected viewers, so the record shows who has authority, what changes now, and what remains unresolved, while the careful reading stays limited to the confirmed source trail and pending decision. Trump's speech stops short of offering evidence of vote tampering. The Washington Post, NPR, CBS News, and CNN describe a speech that raised election fraud claims without presenting proof that would let officials verify the allegation. The issue for the public is the gap between a public accusation and records that can be checked: ballots, registration files, court exhibits, state certifications, or sworn testimony. The stakes are whether election offices face new pressure, whether courts receive actual evidence, and whether the claim changes policy or remains rhetoric. Watch next. Any filing from the White House, Justice Department, state election officials, or a court that identifies a specific jurisdiction, dataset, witness, or remedy. If a later record names dates, precincts, and documents, the story moves into an evidentiary stage. If not, the current record remains that major outlets heard a claim but did not see proof. The distinction matters because election administration turns on documents and official certifications, not the force of a speech alone. The next hard checkpoint is a public record that can be audited with official paperwork naming dates, offices, and practical effects for affected viewers. So the record shows who has authority, what changes now, and what remains unresolved, while the careful reading stays limited to the confirmed source trail and pending decision. Trump rips Canada as wildfire smoke spreads, says U.S. will add pollution cost to tariffs. Reuters, CNBC, NBC News, and South China Morning Post report that Trump linked Canadian wildfire smoke to a tariff threat, adding environmental pressure to an already tense trade relationship. The immediate policy question is whether that threat becomes written customs guidance, a formal tariff notice, or negotiating language, because each path has different consequences for companies and consumers. The stakes include cross-border trade, wildfire diplomacy, air quality response, and whether pollution arguments become part of tariff policy. Watch next. A White House statement, Federal Register notice, customs bulletin, Canadian government response, or trade negotiation text. Markets and manufacturers will care about the written mechanism, not only the remark. A concrete filing would show which goods are targeted, what authority is cited, and whether Canada can avoid the cost through talks. Until that appears, the sourced record shows a tariff threat tied to smoke, with implementation still unproven. The next official trade document is the practical turning point, so the record shows who has authority, what changes now, and what remains unresolved, while the careful reading stays limited to the confirmed source trail and pending decision before the public treats the claim as settled for the people, institutions, and markets affected, with official paperwork naming dates, offices, and practical effects for affected. Off-duty employee at Colorado ice facility arrested for shooting protester. The Guardian, AP News, CBS News, and New York Post identify the case as a shooting near the Aurora Ice Processing Center involving an off-duty employee and an injured protester. The central facts to separate are the arrest, the victim's condition, the employee's role, and what police say happened outside the facility. The stakes are public safety, accountability for detention center staff, and whether protests around immigration enforcement face new security rules. Watch next. The police affidavit, charging decision, court appearance, victim update, and any statement from the facility operator or local prosecutors. Those records will show whether the case is charged as a spontaneous confrontation, misuse of a weapon, or another criminal theory. Viewers should also watch whether ICE, Aurora officials, or the contractor announce changes for protest management. The story advances when a court or police filing describes motive, timeline, weapon status, and employment consequences. Until then, the strongest record is the arrest report and confirmed injury, not online argument around the protest, while the careful reading stays limited to the confirmed source trail and pending decision before the public treats the claim as settled for the people, institutions, and markets affected, with official paperwork naming dates, offices, and practical effects for affected viewers. Iran war updates. Bridges and water plants hit as strikes stretch to 7th straight day. The New York Times, PBS, The Washington Post, and ABC reporting describe a widening strike pattern involving bridges, energy targets, and water infrastructure. The significance is humanitarian as much as military. Damage to transport and water systems can affect civilians long after a strike ends. The key uncertainty is which sites were hit, who controls them, and whether outside monitors can verify casualties or service disruptions. Watch next. Official statements from the governments involved, satellite or field reports, aid agency access, and any diplomatic response from regional powers. If water, bridges, or energy facilities remain offline, the story becomes an infrastructure and civilian protection crisis, not only a battlefield update. Viewers should look for named locations, repair timelines, casualty revisions, and whether international law questions enter the public record. The next verified field report matters more than broad war language, because it can confirm who is affected, and what services are actually disrupted before the public treats the claim as settled for the people, institutions, and markets affected with official paperwork naming, dates, offices, and practical effects for affected viewers, so the record shows who has authority, what changes now, and what remains unresolved, while the careful reading stays limited to the confirmed source trail and pending decision. Knesset dissolves. How will Israel vote in October's general election? Al Jazeera, AP News, Armenpress, and the Jerusalem Post describe Israel's parliament moving toward dissolution and an October election timetable. The important question is how the legal calendar, party lists, coalition discipline, and campaign deadlines translate a parliamentary vote into an actual national election. The stakes are government stability, security policy, budget decisions, and whether parties reshape alliances before voters go to the polls. Watch next. The final dissolution text, election commission calendar, candidate list deadlines, party defections, and any court or procedural challenge to the timetable. Polls will matter, but the first hard record is the official schedule that tells parties and voters what happens next. A later statement from the Knesset or election authorities should confirm the date, caretaker government powers, and filing requirements. Until then, the sourced record shows a political breakpoint with implementation details still needed. The next procedural notice will decide whether October is locked in or still vulnerable to delay for the people, institutions, and markets affected with official paperwork naming dates, offices, and practical effects for affected viewers. So the record shows who has authority, what changes now, and what remains unresolved, while the careful reading stays limited to the confirmed source trail and pending decision before the public treats the claim as settled. India moves fasting activist to hospital, police say. Reuters, The Guardian, College Times, and First Post report that Indian activist Sonam Wangchuk was moved to a hospital after a hunger strike connected to his public campaign. The immediate distinction is between medical care, police action, and the underlying protest demand, because each has a different authority and consequence. The stakes are the activist's health, the government's handling of dissent, and whether supporters see the transfer as protection, coercion, or an attempt to end the demonstration. Watch next. A hospital bulletin, police statement, court petition, family or lawyer comment, and any official response to the protest demands. A useful update should state his condition, whether he can speak with supporters or counsel, and whether any charges or restrictions apply. The public record should also clarify who ordered the transfer and under what legal power. Until those details appear, the safest account is that police confirmed a hospital move after a prolonged fast, with the legal and medical consequences still unresolved with official paperwork naming dates, offices, and practical effects for affected viewers, so the record shows who has authority, what changes now, and what remains unresolved, while the careful reading stays limited to the confirmed source trail and pending decision before the public treats the claim as settled.